So growing up, my earliest childhood memories of playing Nintendo games was during the era of the Nintendo Wii. And thanks to this console, I was able to experience a lot of great games over the years. From stuff that was new at the time, or even a lot of old retro games thanks to the Virtual Console. But most importantly, this console was able to have backwards compatibility with the Nintendo GameCube. And back in the day, I always thought this was the coolest thing Nintendo has ever done, as I was able to grow up with so many great games like Zelda Wind Waker, Pikmin, Luigi's Mansion, Super Mario Sunshine, Metroid Prime, Sonic Adventure, Double Dash. God damn, this lineup is so good. But out of all the games releasing on this console, I feel like the one that had the biggest legacy throughout has to be Super Smash Bros. Melee, which is a game that people still talk about to this very day and has a big relevancy in the esports scene. But despite all of that, I've never actually played this game before, as back in the day, my main fixation for Smash Bros. Was with Brawl. I did know Melee existed at the time, but I never really gave it a second thought until years later when I knew more about Nintendo's history. Especially during the Wii U and 3DS era, where I've heard so many big things about Melee, how it's the most competitive Smash game in the series. And not only that, but also has one of the more interesting single-player modes next to Smash Bros. Brawl. But the reason why I never really played it until now is because I've always heard the best way to play Melee is the most authentic way of just playing it on a GameCube. But the problem is that this was around the time when GameCube prices skyrocketed in sales, so getting an actual copy of Melee was nearly impossible if you want to fork off $80. I mean, hell, before the remake came out, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door was at $100 last year. However, recently after a trip to a retro game store, I was able to finally pick up a copy of Smash Bros. Melee at a good price. And so I can finally play Melee the most efficient way possible. Now, as for the game itself, after the big success of the first entry on N64, development for the next game started afterwards, with the main showcase for this entry being a graphical showpiece of Nintendo's newest console at the time, the Nintendo GameCube, with Masahiro Sakurai and HAL returning as the main developers for this game. With them working very early during the development of the GameCube, so early in fact that they didn't even have dev kits for the console. With the main priority for this game is try to expand on everything from characters, modes, the game's controls, gameplay, graphics, all of it, giving Sakurai and his team a whopping 13 months to make this all possible. And keep in mind, this is not something like Majora's Mask where they were able to reuse all the assets. They had to rework everything from scratch on brand new hardware. And the pressure to make this game as high quality as it could was felt throughout development, with Sakurai barely taking any rest during the game's development process, as he recalls his lifestyle at the time being very destructive, and so it really makes the final product itself even more impressive. As when this game finally released in 2001, it received critical acclaim, and as I mentioned earlier, it's still being played to this very day in the esports scene. Their main goal was to expand on everything from Smash 64, and they certainly succeed in doing so, and even expanding on the age rating from going from E to T. I know this was around the time when the E10 rating didn't exist around the time, so it was pretty much a crapshoot on which game gets what rating. So it's very funny just to look at a screenshot in this game and say, yep, this is a T-rated game. But anyway, so with everything out of the way, let's get started. So when you boot up the game, you are greeted to the ever so iconic opening cutscene of Super Smash Bros. Melee. I might have never played this game before, but I can say I do remember seeing this intro a lot online, and I still think to this very day it holds up very well, with most of the characters being able to shine in their respective games, like Samus fighting off Ridley with the baby, or Fox going after Wolf. Ending things off with Super Smash Brothers Melee! Alrighty, so after examining through the menus and see what this game has, I think it's very appropriate to start off with a simple match. And this is the character roster you'll be starting out on when you first boot up the game, with about 14 characters in the base game with 11 unlockable characters, giving you a total of 26 fighters, which is more than twice the amount from the last game, with most of the characters being expansions of certain series. With fighters like Peach and Bowser being from the Mario series, Ganondorf, Zelda, and Sheik makes their big debut in this game. And same with Mewtwo, which, honestly as a kid, I thought he was literally the coolest Pokemon ever. So I was a bit confused on why he was never in Brawl. But as for new Nintendo series that made their debut in this game, we have a few cool retro callbacks like the Ice Climbers, who are well known for the classic NES game, and we even have Mr. Game & Watch, who is pretty much an entity of all Nintendo's Game & Watch games over the years. And lastly, and most famously, we have Marth and Roy, who makes their debut from the Fire Emblem series, with Marth being a character that was pretty much in the very first game, while Roy was in the latest game at the time. Now at the time before Fire Emblem became a big Nintendo seller, this was pretty much their debut for the Western audience because at the time, Fire Emblem was a Japan-only series. Until 2 years after this game release, as they were able to get their first ever localized entry, pretty much starting the big domino effect that we see Fire Emblem today. So yeah, overall, it's a pretty nice lineup of brand new characters that feels like a natural evolution of the original roster. With the only slight gripe I can think of, and this is pretty common opinion, is the 6 clone characters. With Dr. Mario being a clone of Mario, Falco is a clone of Fox, Pichu to Pikachu, Marth to Roy, Young Link to Link, and the most weird one of all, Captain Falcon to Ganondorf. This decision was made mostly due to the very short development time, but despite that, I honestly feel like this is a pretty smart move because it allows a lot more characters into the roster, even if they act a bit similar to others. I honestly view these characters as more so bonus characters than anything. Okay, so for the gameplay of Melee, since I've already talked most about the gameplay loop in Super Smash Bros. 64, I'm just going to talk about what has been improved upon from the last game. Like for example, all the characters in this game have a brand new side special to add a little bit more strategy to the movesets. Secondly though, and most famously, all the characters feels a lot more snappier control than the last game, as everything feels a lot more faster than the last game and the brand new characters added feels very new and refreshed. Especially with characters like Marth and Peach, who are characters I didn't really expect to play as often as I did when playing through Melee. And as for other characters, well, I always thought Mewtwo was a really cool addition to this game, as when I first ever saw Mewtwo was in a Smash Bros. Game, it was around the time when I really adored the Pokemon movie, and I feel like they translate his movesets really well in this game. But if you're asking for my personal Smash main, it would definitely have to be Yoshi, as I've been playing as this guy for every single Smash generation, and Melee will be no exception. Although I have to say, even though I really love the additions they added for Smash Bros. Melee, I've gotta say I do have a bit of some gripes when it comes to some of the characters' controls in this game. Like, I love playing as Bowser, for example, in later Smash games, but I found like with the first entry he was in, he feels a bit too sluggish for my taste, as stuff like his mid-air controls just feel very janky to go through. Doubly so with Ganondorf, who is just a slower Captain Falcon. And then there's Pichu, who is pretty much just a way weaker Pikachu that takes damage every time he does an electric attack. But besides those characters, I feel like all the fighters included in this game, including the returning ones, are really well designed throughout. Even though that sometimes the movement can feel a bit janky at times. Especially like characters like Fox, who is very fast, but at the same time, I sometimes tend to lose track on where he is. But regardless, it is still very enjoyable to play through this game. Especially when you're going through the various new stages in this game, which, I'll be completely honest, considering the 13-month dev time they had for this game, this is honestly the most impressive part in the game in my opinion. With Smash 64 there was only 9 stages, but going up to Super Smash Bros. Melee, that number went all the way up to 26 new stages, with 3 of them returning from the previous game, giving you a grand total of 29 stages. And all of them does a really good job on representing each game and trying to do something unique from one another. With my personal favorite ones being Jungle Jade's for that beautiful sunset, Yoshi's Story because I adore the handcrafted style from that N64 game,
Hey, look at that, it's Randall.
and Pokemon Stadium has a really cool gimmick of the entire stage morphing, which gives it the unpredictability nature. And as for something like On It, this was a stage I always go back to in other Smash games because I really adore the soundtrack alone. Same with Rainbow Cruise, which I played a lot during Brawl, and the Fountain of Dreams is just a beautiful stage to look at. Now while some of the stages in this game could be a bit overkill with some of the gimmicks, overall I feel like most of the stages in this game are really well made. with all of them being very fun to go through and very replayable, especially when you try the brand new Smash modes included in this game. Like Coin Battle, which is basically you trying to collect as much as coins as you can while attacking the opponents. Or Bonus Battle, which... how does this work again? So, if you want to take a break from the usual melee play, you can always try out the new modes included in the single-player content, which has been expanded upon greatly in this game. Like Classic Mode, for example, which is basically a refined version of the original N64 single-player campaign. As you go up against randomly generated characters doing small little minigames like Target Test and Race to the End, and finishing off with Master Hand. Or, depending on the difficulty, you can also fight Crazy Hand, which, I'll be completely honest, caught me off guard when I was playing through Classic Mode. As I was just trying to fight Master Hand, and then suddenly the game ominously stops as they show another hand. But after you're able to defeat these two entities, you're able to collect a special trophy depending on which character. And then there's Adventure Mode, which is the original single-player campaign for this game, as you travel across different Nintendo series trying to fight it out. While doing some obstacle courses along the way, like traveling through the Mushroom Kingdom, stomping on Goombas, exploring the depths of this dungeon to find the Triforce in Zelda, and trying to escape Brinstar from Metroid. I honestly really adore these obstacle courses, as these areas really feels like you're actually traveling across through different Nintendo series, although I kinda wish there were a bit more of these kinds of things. As after the Metroid section is when things kind of halted a bit and ends up being like Classic Mode again. Like after you head to the Star Fox world, you try to fight Foxy McCloud, although I do like how they replicate the dialogue from Star Fox 64 in this game. But if there was one thing that really caught me off guard while playing this mode, has to be the difficulty, because the Adventure Mode is surprisingly very hard. Like I'm literally at the second section of this area fighting Zelda, and she really kicked my butt during this match. And I was playing this on normal difficulty as well, so yeah, Adventure Mode can be very challenging. Although it's either that or I just suck at the game. Keep in mind, this is literally my first ever time playing through Melee, so some of my slip-ups must have been due to muscle memory from later games. But I still continue on regardless, as I was able to get to the final points of each of the rounds. Although ironically, the last bits of the game is way easier than the midpoint. As the final rounds is basically you going up against a bunch of stickmans, and ending things off with a giant Bowser, but depending on how fast you can clear Adventure Mode, the trophy of Bowser will ominously rise from the depths of the stage, as the trophy literally transforms into this giant beast. Which, I'll be honest, it was another thing I completely forgot about, as I was going through multiple runs of Adventure Mode and I never got to this boss fight. So this actually caught me by surprise as well. So yeah, this is the game that debuted Bowser's much more monstrous form, Giga Bowser, which is the form that Bowser kept throughout the entire series starting with this entry. With his design being based on Sakurai's original interpretation of Bowser back in the Famicom days. Since his 8-bit sprite is very simplistic, he pretty much filled in the blank as this terrifying monster. And honestly, that mindset was translated very well in Melee, and a great way to end things off with Adventure Mode. As after you're able to finish off this mode, you'll be rewarded with a special trophy, which is another thing that this game introduced to the series. And the best way to describe these things is that they're pretty much these cool little 3D dioramas of various Nintendo things. Whether if it's a certain character, a vehicle, or a certain object, they're fully 3D modeled and even have a cute little description on which game they originated from, really emphasizing the fact that this really is a Nintendo museum. And there is so many trophies in this game, and you lock them very frequently. Either if you're trying to find them during the Adventure Mode, doing a special minigame to collect trophies, or trying to earn coins to do this slot machine to get more trophies, it always feels rewarding to get them throughout. But these things aren't the only thing you'll be unlocking throughout the game, as there are so many characters and stages you can unlock throughout. Like for example, there's this minigame called Home Run Contest, where the main thing is that you need to build up damage on this sandbag, and once the counter goes all the way down, you have to swing it with a bat. With your main goal as having the sandbag fly as far away as possible, with the main challenge is trying to get the sandbag at a certain distance so you can unlock a stage, which so happens to be the Yoshi's Island stage from N64. Or there's Multi-Man Melee, which is a durability test to go against these, I know I called them stickmen, but do they have an actual name? Oh, okay, they're called wireframes. So yeah, you go up against 100 of these trying to unlock Falco. And then there's Cruel Melee. Go! You know, I think of all the unlockable characters in this game, I feel like the one that's probably the most recognizable has to be Mewtwo, who requires you to play through 20 hours worth of versus matches, but for this one I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. As in, I'm going to connect about 4 controllers into the GameCube port, and wait about 5 hours until I can unlock him. I was honestly worried because I don't actually have other GameCube controllers besides the regular one, as the closest thing I do have for it are these old wireless connectors, so I'm very happy that it actually registered as an alternative controller. But as for my personal favorite challenge, I think it would definitely be trying to unlock Mr. Game & Watch, as it allowed me to try every single target smash stage in the game. Now with these obstacles, they pretty much small little challenges where you need to break all the targets. But what is cool is that every single character in this game have their unique break the target stage, where it takes full advantage of the character's moveset. And they also have this interesting difficulty curve when it comes to the clone characters, as stages like Pichu and Falco are way harder than their actual counterparts. Although for Dr. Mario and Ganondorf, I feel like their stages are a bit more janky compared to the others. But after going through the final one, I was able to get Mr. Game & Watch, and also the Dreamland stage, essentially killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And finally, there is event matches, which is pretty much you against some opponents, but with a certain criteria. Like for example, in one of these, it's pretty much an all-out Pokemon battle, as you're unable to hurt the opponents and only Pokemon can damage them. Or this one, where you need to protect Peach from a giant Bowser under a minute. There was even a 1v1 match against Link and Dark Link, pretty much reminiscing on Ocarina of Time. And then there's weirder ones, like you against a bunch of people on top of a giant Goomba. But when it's all said and done, and after going through all these hard challenges, it does lead to one hell of a satisfying payoff, as you get to see all the fires that you were able to unlock. And also, you were able to unlock one final single player mode, which is All-Star Mode, which is pretty much inspired by the arenas in Kirby games, as it's one final gauntlet against all the fighters. But unlike Classic Mode and Adventure Mode, where every time you go into a new match, your health goes all the way back down to 0, your damage pretty much carries within every single match. And so in between rounds, you also find yourselves in this small little rest area, which allows you to heal with limited resources. So it's best to try and use these items wisely. Although I've got to say about this rest area, it probably has the most beautiful remix I've ever heard in a game. Which leads me to the presentation of this game. So when this released, it was pretty much one of the very first games on the GameCube. And so because of this, the art style for a lot of these characters are heavily based on their N64 designs, especially with characters from Mario and Zelda. I know technically this could be labeled as very dated in design, but honestly I kinda like the art style Melee has. In a way, it's kinda like seeing an HDified N64 game. I mean, hell, with most of the trophies in this game, they look like they were straight out of an N64 render. And I mean that in the best possible way. Especially with a lot of these stages. As since the GameCube was a huge upgrade in terms of graphics, you get to see a lot of these classic N64 games, or even Super Nintendo games, in next-gen glory. Doubly so with the soundtrack, because originally with the N64 games, it was still in that chip-tuned era. But jumping all the way to next-gen hardware, we have a full-on orchestra for a lot of these soundtracks, with all of them being insanely good remixes. Man. So that was Super Smash Bros. Melee, and overall, as someone who has never played this game before, I honestly had a generally really good time playing through this game. Now I wouldn't say personally this would be my favorite Smash game, but even still, after 20 years of this game being around, I'd say it holds up extremely well. And I fully understand why people still wholeheartedly love this game still. And even though I do feel like there's a slight jank in terms of control in this game, I feel like it adds more than actually subtracts. Like I remember last year when I was at Super Smash Con, I was seeing a lot of these people playing competitively, and I've got to say, seeing actual competitive Smash players playing Melee really makes this game look like a whole different beast. And while I don't really see myself as a competitive Smash player anytime soon, I'm still going to enjoy playing through Smash Bros. Either way. And I'm so glad that I was able to play through Melee for the very first time, as this was the first time I was actually able to fully appreciate this game. As for not only for the game itself, but also what it did for future Smash Bros. Games. If you're very curious about the GameCube's lineup, then I highly recommend trying out Smash Bros. Melee. It's considered one of the most acclaimed games in the series, and man, it definitely deserved it. But as for the next video, according to the polls, it looks like we're still going to be around for the GameCube as we jump into Delfino Plaza. So the next time we'll be here, we'll be talking about the Mario game for Nintendo GameCube. But that'll do it for today, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye!